Hello, Flight Sim community. This is Beetle Beast, and we're currently on the ground in Saline County, Arkansas, outside of the Cessna 185, and we're going to be taking this airplane from Saline County about 40 miles away to the town of Hot Springs. I heard a comment recently which was, hey, that's kind of like navigating gatekeeping. And I was like, wow, that doesn't make a lot of sense because most navigation is relatively straightforward. You know, once you kind of understand what it is you're looking at and how you're doing it. So I thought, what the heck, let's go ahead and make a video. We're going to use VORs today. We're going to have a little bit of ADF, just a tad bit. There are some limitations that I've kind of discovered here inside of the 185, unfortunately, and I'm going to put little circles around it like I always do. But if you look at that top OBS right here, that CDR OBS does not function independently of the GPS. So the GPS here is inside of the airplane. The other unfortunate of this airplane is we don't have a standalone DME, which I really wish you did. I wish we had the ability to link this up and tune in a DME frequency and have it hold the DME frequency. So unfortunately, we're going to have to use our GPS simply for the sake of the distance equipment. We could always just turn the GPS off, and then we're just flying. We're going to be navigating solely by reference to our nav 1. But the unfortunate is, without having a secondary navigate, we won't know when we cross waypoints along the Victor airway that we're going to be flying. So we're actually going to be flying along it's Victor 124, which goes between Little Rock and Hot Springs. Like I said, Saline County is just south of that airway. So when we take off, we're going to be intercepting the airway really quickly. So as a result of that, there's not going to be a ton of time for playing around and trying to swap between some of the other frequencies here. I know that we can identify, off of Pine Bluff, we could actually identify a couple of these waypoint fixes as they come across Victor 124, but we're not going to do that just because it would be kind of inefficient just trying to identify those points with only having one OBS. In an ideal situation, if we were going to do that, and I would have loved to have just been able to turn it off, the unfortunate was we can't do that and use the second OBS for our navigation, as this one here is tied solely to the GPS. And you can notice that here, if you start making a switch, take a look, we've got what should be the nav 1 radio up here. Every time you click it, it also changes what should be the nav 2. The same is true for the com. Oh, hold on, we got the same frequency there. Let's change that. Yeah, as you can tell, it changed right down here too. So this is essentially one radio. You've got com 1 nav 1, com 1 nav 1. They're just represented differently. So if I was building this airplane, there would have been a switch so that you could have done that and switched them over, but unfortunately you can't in the sim. So it is very kind of unfortunate. You are able to use OBS 1 here, it looks like, for a localizer, but we're going to shoot a VOR approach when we get down to Hot Springs. So if you were to use the localizer, you are able to do that, swap this from CDI to VLOC, and you should be able to get localizer and glide slope information on OBS 1. However, OBS 2 will display only your actual OBS course deviation information. So this one's going to be used for our naving. This one's going to just kind of be sitting here, and then kind of towards the end, we're going to come over here and look at this ADF bearing pointer because there will be a course that we can identify twice. It's the on the VOR approach into the VOR 5 in Hot Springs. We'll be able to identify a point by both the GPS and a bearing pointer coming off of the ADF. So we'll do both of those. We're going to have some fun with this. We'll see how it goes. But let's real quick set something up. So leaving out of leaving out of Saline County here, like I said, we're going to intercept that course really quickly. It's going to be the 250-degree course, or 250-degree radio coming off of Little Rock. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll that in. When we take off, we're taking off runway 20, so we're going to be taking off kind of to the northeast, and then our course, of course, is going to be, will be coming over here towards the southwest. So like I said, we're going to be crossing radials very quickly. The course is going to come in very fast. We're going to have to intercept that course and then fly outbound. 113.9 should be the frequency for Little Rock. That's already in. 113.9 shows up right there. Let's get flying. Brakes are coming off. Can't quite see over the nose. I'm sure we'll see it when the tail comes up. Let's get to rolling. All right, power's in. Flaps coming up. All right, we would have contacted ATC, or they would have already cleared us en route or on our initial filed course. You can see that that course on that bottom OBS is actually coming in already. So we're going to fly that one there. That's going to be the radial outbound 250 degrees from the Little Rock VOR. I'm going to start making that left turn here so we can start easing into that course a little bit. And I'm going to go to our nearest page here so that we can see where we're at from Little Rock, because we will need the VOR information, because our first fix that we're going to come across, and I only paused there because I wanted to make sure I was looking at everything correctly. Our first fix that we're going to come across is going to be about 22 DME away. I believe that is the Beggin intersection. All right, so we are on that 250 radial. We're going to go ahead and keep that turn coming around. We'll see if we have any wind that we're going to have to adjust for as we get a little bit higher, but we're going to be flying initially about a 250 degree heading, and if there is wind, we'll adjust for it as we move forward. So, as you can see there, the course is now centered up on that bottom OBS. We're climbing through 2,000 feet, 2,500 feet. I think we'll climb on up to 4,000 feet today as we cruise out towards Hot Springs. And like I said, our first fix that we're looking at is going to be 22 miles away, and we'll be looking over here on our GPS for that distance from Little Rock. So we're on the course, needle centered up, coming through 3,000 feet. We're 17 miles away on the Victor 124 Victor Airway, leaving out of Little Rock. So something I will say, if you're used to flying airplanes with the G1000, you're going to notice really quickly that while the flying, of course, isn't particularly difficult, the cross reference that you're going to have to do in order to make sure that you're flying things correctly, you're going to be looking at a lot of information. Now, your airspeed indicator is not going to be quite the most important one, but you're going to want to have that in your scan as well. And that's normally the difficulty that people have when they go from flying glass airplanes to moving back towards a steam cockpit or a legacy cockpit like this. You're having to take in different pieces of information from different gauges that are presenting the information in a different fashion. It looks like a bunch of clocks, right? But if you look through the standard six-pack here, the majority of my time is going to be spent looking at the attitude indicator. However, of course, you're going to have to also look at your altimeter to the right. You're going to be looking at your course directly down and diagonal to it, which is our CDI, our course deviation indicator there on the OBS. I believe that stands for Omni Bearing Selector. And then, of course, you're going to have to watch what your actual heading is. And once again, this airplane here does not have a heading bug, so you can't just put like a big orange mark in front of you so you can see it. So just so you know, that doesn't exist. And it kind of causes you to have to look a little bit more. You've got to pay attention when you're flying airplanes that don't have all of the extra navigation aids, or not navigation aids, but the aids to navigation. So we're almost 21 miles now, so we got about a mile to go, and we'll be at the Beggin intersection. And then the next fix that we're going to come across is going to be the Tayev intersection. You see it there on your screen. And Tayev is going to be at 27 miles, so we're cooking along pretty well. We're right on our course. And yeah, so that's the basic gist of it. And of course, if you're flying faster airplanes, the real key is that you get there faster. Nothing else really particularly changes here. You simply are going to go through time and space quicker. Things that are important to note that I didn't really talk about, and I probably should have. So if we look at that OBS down here, there's a little bit of information that's been displayed on it. I'm going to try to zoom in, but I'm also hand flying, as I don't think this thing actually has an autopilot, so it's going to be me flying, talking, and trying to stare at another screen here while I focus on it. But if you look at the OBS here, what you have set at the top is the bearing or the radial that you're trying to fly, essentially, the radial that you're tuning and trying to look at. At the bottom is the reciprocal. It's very difficult to see on this. If you zoom in, you can, but it's hard to read it. Okay, right here is the direction indicator. So the little arrow here, and I say little, being behind us, indicates that the VOR location is behind us. And I think I might have covered some of this in our basic navigation in the 172 that I had done as well. If I was to take this and spin it around, this is the radial to. So if we wanted to go to it, we'd center that up like that, and we'd fly a 070 degree radial to the VOR. The reciprocal, of course, of that is going to be over here. So that's the way it works for navigation. Right now we are trying to fly that 250 radial outbound from the VOR, so we're going to go ahead and fly it right there where we're at. And yeah, so you have to pay attention to what your sense is if you're going to or from, if your radial is to or from the VOR. You could track the opposite way. If I wanted to track towards the VOR with this from indication, you most definitely could. But if you're going in the opposite direction of what your sense is saying, if you're going to the VOR with the from indication, the needles are going to act backwards. So if you were to be having the course slightly to your left, the needle's going to show slightly to the right. And if you're not aware of that, you run the risk of getting yourself confused and lost and wondering why your needles aren't coming in even though you've been flying for what feels like hours to get there. So just note that that's the way it works. And yeah, we're now about a mile away from our next fix, which was Taev. And then our next fix that we're going to come across after that, it's 33 miles away, and that's a fix called Lons. Now, something else happens at Lons, and that is the navigation crossover point. So that's going to be where we swap from looking at the Little Rock VOR, VORTAC, sorry if I use the correct terminology, it is a VORTAC, which is a combination VOR and TACAN. So we're going to be switching from looking at the Little Rock VORTAC behind us to looking at the Hot Springs VOR DME, which is a VOR with distance measuring equipment. It can also essentially tell you how far you are from it. Unfortunately, like I said, the system in the game here, while the game has DME capabilities, this aircraft does not. And like I said, I wanted to find something kind of basic. But we're going to swap over to look at Hot Springs VOR DME, and we're going to navigate the remainder of the way into Hot Springs, that last 14 miles, utilizing their DME. And that's actually going to be where the instrument approach is going to begin at. We're going to begin by flying outbound from the Hot Springs VOR, and I'll bring that chart up here in just a second so we can talk about that. So we've just passed Taev. It was at 27 DME. Probably saw that happen when it got up there. And now we're headed over to Lons, and like I said, that's going to be at 33 DME, at which point we're going to swap over to the Hot Springs VOR. And that's going to be 110.0, so we're going to go ahead and get that set up here. Now, we're not changing radials here, but there could be some variation between where that course actually comes in. So we might be slightly off course when we make the switch over. Just kind of the way it goes, because you're looking at a point between two VORs. Even though their magnetic variation is probably pretty dang close, you're still going to run that risk that the radials are going to be slightly misaligned, so it may show up slightly different. We'll see kind of where we're at when we make the swap. But right now, we're tracking pretty even here on the 250. It looks like it's a 071 radial outbound from the VOR is what we would expect. And hopefully, when we make the swap over, we're going to be pretty close to that. We've got about 3 miles to go. And yeah, once we make that swap over, I think we'll start briefing the approach. Try to get myself back to that 4,000. I know I lost about 150 feet there a minute ago. That's a matter of looking down here at an iPad, which, if you're thinking about this too, if you're flying an airplane, this is one of the struggles of flying instrument and small airplanes by yourself. If you're navigating, if you're aviating, navigating, communicating, you're doing all of the things. Unlike me, hopefully you're not trying to figure out what you're going to say next. But if you're doing all of those things in a small airplane while you're trying to fly, and every time you look down, something's going away, something's going somewhere else, flying small airplanes like this can be a handful. And like I said, if you're one who's flown a lot in the G1000, if you've used a lot of autopilot, I would say give this stuff a try. It's quite fun. It's quite a challenge. It'll give you guys an extra challenge while you're flying flight sim to do something that's kind of basic and very demanding of you and your attention. All right, so here we go on our 32. We're about to be at a crossover point. I'm going to swap that. It got its new signal. 071 should be right about there. And right now I have the radio from that 071 radio right there. So our course should be over here to the left ever so slightly. Let's go on over here and grab it. And we're going to fly that for the next, I said 14 miles. Now we're about 13 away at this point. And then let's go ahead and talk about this procedure at Hot Springs. It's always fun to do this as I look down. I'm pressing buttons on my iPad. I could bring up the chart that's actually part of Flight Sim, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and use it here, and I'll put the other one on the screen for you guys. That'll come from AirNav, so you guys can just see it from there instead of us trying to use the LIDO chart that's probably included here with Flight Sim. But yeah, so we're looking at the VOR approach, runway 5 at Hot Springs, Arkansas. The frequency is going to be 110.0. It'll be 058 degrees inbound. The final approach fix, the FAF, is Zapple. And you're going to cross Zapple at 2,200 feet. Now, initially, we're going to fly outbound on the Hot Springs VOR, minimum altitude 2,700 feet, cross Zapple, and then that's going to be at 2,700 feet, do a procedure turn to fly ourselves around 193 outbound on that, 013 inbound, re-intercept the course 058, and then we're going to fly 058 inbound to Zapple. We can descend down to 2,200 feet once we're coming back inbound, and then we'll go down to a MDA of 960 feet. It's pretty straightforward. The course outbound from the Hot Springs VOR is going to be 238, so just a little bit left of where we're at right now. We're already sitting there at the 240, almost 250, so just a little bit off of that, but it shouldn't be too big of a deal. If we have to go missed approach when we get down there, if we don't see anything, we're going to do a climbing right-hand turn to 3,000 feet over to the Hot Springs VOR radio 123, intercept that, fly outbound on it, and we hold at the SOX intersection while intercepting and doing a teardrop entry on the hold. That sounds like a lot of fun. Let's hope that we see a runway when we get down here, because I don't really feel like doing all of that. But we've briefed it, so now we know what we're doing. So, something I will mention here, as you get closer to the VOR station, the radials that you're looking at, it's kind of like the spokes on a bicycle wheel. So if you were to look at a bicycle wheel, the further away you are, the greater the distance between the spokes, the further you are away from the center. So at the center of the bicycle wheel would be the VOR DME. At the edge of the bicycle wheel is going to be the rim, right? The further you are away from that center, the further away the spokes are. Each one of those spokes, the distance between them is going to be greater. The spokes represent the radials that we're flying across. So as you get closer to the VOR, those radials are going to get closer and closer together. So the sensitivity of the VOR needle is going to appear to be much greater as you get close to the VOR. Which is why VOR approaches work really well, especially if you are close to the VOR and the VOR is near the field that you're working with. The further away you are, the greater there is for slop and variation and your ability to kind of be off course and have the needle not actually notice where you're at. So, yeah, so as we get in closer here, that needle is going to move a lot more in one direction or the other. What's also going to become very evident as we get very close to it, I'm talking within about 2 miles or so of the VOR, that sensitivity is going to increase, and we have what we call like a zone of confusion. And that's a spot where the VOR needle might go left to right as you seem like you're bouncing across one radial to the next radial. So the key to that is don't go chasing it. If you're already on a course and the needle starts to go kind of crazy, but you know you're getting very close to the VOR, just fly what you were already flying, stay there. It's going to go through its zone of confusion. You're going to be looking for a switch in the tense here. So we're going to watch that needle to arrow turn to a from arrow. That's going to mean that you've now passed over top of the VOR, at which point we're going to turn to our new heading here of 248, which we'll have to tune, or 238, I'm sorry, and we're going to fly that outbound, and then we're going to once again be looking at our DME distance from Hot Springs to make sure that we are tracking outbound, and then we'll use that to help identify where Zapel is. Now, I mentioned that we're also going to be looking at the an NDB, and we're going to use that because there is an NDB radio that comes off of HOSI, the HO NDB, which is right next to Hot Springs, and I imagine that that's what HOSI's for. We just crossed some radios. That was not the airplane. That was me talking and kind of steering in the bad direction. So we're going to fix that real quick. It'll come back in really, really fast, as you can tell right now. It doesn't take a whole lot of change to make it start moving. 3.5 miles away from the VOR. So we will have to tune in that frequency, which is going to be tuned down here on the ADF. Now, with your ADF, it's kind of interesting here. Most of the ADFs that I was used to kind of dealing with only had the input for one. This one actually has an input. You have a standby and an ability to input a frequency separate. So the one on the right-hand side is your standby. That's where you're actually going to be manipulating the change. And then there's an FRQ button, which is your frequency switch. And you're going to be able to use that to turn to the other frequency and swap them over. So the HOSSY, HO NDB, also known as HOSI, is going to be a 385 frequency. So we'll go ahead and we'll try to tune that in real quick. So 3, 8, then you have to pull out, get your 385, click the frequency button, and then we'll have to add something else into our scan. We'll see if that shows up. Oh, it's not 3. Hold on. Let's go back over. We need a 3 on the big number. 385. All right, we hit that zone of confusion. See how quickly that needle just went flinging out there. And while I know I'm a little bit off on the course, that little, how far away that went was not as a result of our action. So I'm going to go ahead and hold about 240-ish, right about there. And I'm not going to go going crazy trying to chase and find that radio. Okay, we're going to let it be. And we know that we're going to be descending down to 2,700 feet for the outbound leg after we've crossed the VOR, which we haven't got there yet. We're close. Half mile. All right, there's your little switch. I'm going to tune this over here to 238, which is going to be our outbound. Watch for that needle to start coming back in. And as it does, we're going to make that left-hand turn ever so slightly to join up on that 238. I'm going to go ahead and force it over here just a little bit more. There she comes. Start making that left turn to 238. Don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. And for the sake of argument, I'm going to go ahead and set this to 058. Now, the course from HO or HOSI is 151 bearing to the radial. So as we fly back inbound, it's going to end up pointing initially off here to the left-hand side, and then it's going to be pointing to the right-hand side on the way back in. And it should point to right about there. And that's when you know you've passed that point that it's also going to be identified as the 5.9 DME. So, a few things to look at. Nothing too crazy, but a few things to kind of keep your mind on. I'm going to go ahead and start making that descent down to 2,700 feet. Inside of 1,000 there is 3,700 feet. Got about a mile to go before we even hit Hasi, and then we'll keep going out ever so slightly for another minute or so after that. Make our left-hand turn to 193, our right-hand turn to 013, re-intercept our course inbound. All right, 100 feet to go. Now, if you noticed, I did move that heading bug over there, and I put it to the inbound course, and that's because it's a movable card ADF. That's going to help us be able to identify exactly what we're looking for, because what you don't have on an ADF is an actual radial. You're looking at a, how would I say here? It is an antenna on the aircraft pointing to a radio frequency beacon on the ground. That's it. So there's no additional information. We just passed our 5.9, by the way. There's no additional information that's given. So in order to make it a lot easier for us to tell exactly when we pass that point in space, having something that we can kind of correspond to, and I put that not quite there, there's 058, having something that you can correspond it to so that it makes it a little bit easier for you to see is so important, so incredibly helpful. So that's why I moved that card, so that when we see it past that 158-degree bearing, we'll know, hey, that's where we're at. Because without it, when you have fixed card or when you have a fixed card ADF that you're trying to monitor, you will have your hands full. Overshot my course ever so slightly. We'll go ahead and come back just around to the right a little bit. That's about right. And we're going to watch this clock over here. We'll go about 30 seconds. And then we'll make that right-hand turn back around. Whoa, airplane? I do not know what just happened there. I got a massive downdraft or something. That was kind of crazy. Because nothing else was changing. It was just suddenly, and everything's pitching down like crazy. It did not move my hand. Changed nothing. But, hey, there is apparently some weather and storms around here. Hence the reason I picked it, because it was IFR. But apparently it's real deal. All right, so we're going to come back around to 013 to intercept the 058 radial back towards the VOR. And I'm going to go ahead and tune in, turn in 058. Right about there. Keep this coming around to 013, which is right about there. We got a little updraft for no good reason. Yeah, it must be the storm. We're getting bounced around like crazy. What a terrible day to fly airplanes. All right, we'll hold our course here. And we're going to wait for that 058 radial to start coming in. And you were able to hopefully see at this point, we've got an idea as to what the sensitivity is for this needle. So it's going to take a little bit, and we can probably wait until it's dang near centered up completely before we make that turn in. Maybe right at the very edge of the OBS circle there. All right, so there's the edge of the circle. Start making that right turn to 058. And now that we're intercept and we're joining the course, we can go on down to 2,200 feet until we get to 5.9 DME, which is coming up pretty quick. So we'll start that descent. Going a little bit right of the 058 heading, just so I can get that radial to come back in a little bit. We need 2,200 feet until we're 5.9, which we're already inside of. You can see that bearing pointer spin off very quickly, which means now we can go all the way down to the minimums, which were 960, I believe it is, 960 feet. I'm a little right, of course, trying to bring that course needle back in. That's why you see us here where we're at. So we're going to continue that descent. We're going down to 960. There's 1,000 feet above the minimums. Power is back out, allowing the airplane to start slowing down. I have not put in the flaps yet. There's going to be plenty of time to configure, but we're going to get close to the flap speed here to make things a little bit easier on us. And the missed approach point is actually going to be when we cross the VOR. All right, we're right on that course there. Let's give that 058 degree heading a try. See if that'll let us track it the remainder of the way. Yeah, 060 appears to be letting that course drift a little bit to the right. So I think we have a little bit of wind. So in order to track inbound, we're going to go a little bit right of that, and we'll hold about 070 and 075. Got less than 200 feet to the minimums. There's 100 feet to the minimums. We're definitely in some rain. Going to add some power. Back in. Get a notch of flaps in. 960, we are there. We're going to go ahead and level ourselves off. And if you look up and slightly to the left, that's your runway. So the only other thing that we didn't talk about here is there is a 2.1 DME visual descent point, which is the point at which, if you're inside of that, you're not going to be able to make a normal approach to landing if you haven't picked up the airfield at that point. Additionally, you've got to watch out for obstacles that could be within inside of that visual descent point that will cause an issue for you and cause your landing to become unsafe. But with the runway in sight, we're going to go ahead and transition ourselves to a normal visual landing. Got 2 notches of flaps in. Go ahead and zoom out a little bit. So hopefully you guys like the video, and hopefully it'll help somebody when it comes to navigating IFR via VORs, Victor Airways. You got a little bit of a demonstration. I didn't do a great job on showing you guys the ADF, so my apologies for not giving a real strong ADF demo. But hopefully this gives you guys just a little bit more insight as to kind of how you would fly a light airplane in some, somewhat challenging weather environments. We're a little bit high, obviously, but we're going to be okay. We got lots of runway down here at Hot Springs. Especially for our Cessna 185. All right, well, once again, thank you guys for watching. I appreciate your support of the channel, and hopefully you guys like the video. Put anything that you might have, questions, comments, in the comment section. If you've got any ideas for other videos, let me know. And until then, just enjoy your simming. Happy flying, happy simming. Thanks again, and everybody, we'll see you next time.